And with that, I welcome you all to this UX Research Group conversation. My name is Anne Lasch, and I'm a senior UX researcher here at GitLab. And yeah, looking forward to guiding you through the session. And I see we already have a question in the agenda. So Christy, would be lovely if you verbalize.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, and thank you for leading this today. I was looking at slide 6 about metadata research, which I know is a project that you personally have led. So I'm curious to hear from you, what caused us to kick this research off? And then what's something surprising that you learned?
Yeah, wonderful. So yeah, what kicked this research off? When I basically joined GitLab as the researcher for the planned and managed stages, I really wanted to understand, what are the open research topics the team have, what is worth looking into, and and that resulted in a longer list of different research topics. And ultimately, this research got prioritized, and I felt it was for various reasons. But one I found valuable is to actually have really this foundational knowledge. Around what information is actually important to GitLab users on these different views, because that ultimately helps to make informed decisions before redesigning anything. And it was also a project, to be honest, that is a little bit more tricky from a methodological point of view. So it just makes sense that a researcher looks into it compared to a product manager or product designer doing it. In terms of learnings, there were a couple of things. I think one of the interesting things or surprising things is when I talked to users in the interviews is that they were actually not aware of how much they see every day. So all the metadata they are presented with. So you can imagine in the interviews, I would actually show users the survey. They would see basically the same screenshot you saw in the presentation. And they kept saying, I don't think I see all of this. Let me check what GitLab looks like for me. And then they would look at their own screen and they're like, oh my gosh, like I'm seeing all of this. Actually, I have no idea. So there's a lot of, subconscious processing of information actually happening, which, can lead to this information, like feelings of being overwhelmed and that everything is a little bit cluttered and harder to find. And I think the other surprising thing is also the context specificity of metadata. So if you look at slide 6, you will see that there is the merge request data is like quite straightforward, but then looking at the issue, which is on the next slide, you can see that depending on the context and the use case and the task people are working on, certain metadata is more important than others at a high level. And I feel that's important from a design perspective as well, because how do you design for these different contexts, basically? Yeah.
That's really interesting. And since I don't think we have another question yet, let me ask a follow-up, which is then what are the specific actionable insights that you are bringing to those teams to say like, hey, now that we know this, here are things that we could do to improve?
Yeah, so there are a couple of things. So for certain things, it's quite clear where you say like, okay, these are things that users need to see. So there was one question, let me go back. There was one question around understanding which metadata needs to be there at all times, which is something that users need to reference often. And then also, what information do they not need to see at all times? And I think that's an interesting bucket because you can then say, you can prioritize, okay, this is metadata they always need to see that, so this should be there. But what about these elements that they don't need to see at all times? Like what is actually the specific context, and then make decisions based on that. Of course, it gets, more complex whenever you talk about customization and, getting that context specificity, but I think that's super important. And also understanding, because we also had this bucket of, I don't use this information or I don't need to see this information, and understanding more, okay, why is that, why or who actually needs to see this information and in which context. And I feel that's something that the team, what I've been getting so far in terms of feedback is that this is something that the team is looking into now to understand, like how to restructure basically the information we show.
Yeah. That's great. That does echo the text feedback that we get in this system usability scale survey where users talk about it. It's cluttered, it's hard to find things, it's overwhelming. So we're getting really good validation of that. The downside of SUS is they'll say it's cluttered, which tells us, oh, there's a problem, but we didn't know what the problem was. So you really dug in to say, okay, it's cluttered. Why do they think it's cluttered? And what can we do to help fix that? So that's great. And it's a really good use of the interplay between running the SUS and then Because that's the problem with surveys, right? You get a lot of what, but you don't get a whole lot of why. So you're really able to dig into the why. That's great.
Yeah, exactly. And even like from a methodological point of view, I mean, this started as a survey and also had open-ended feedback in there. But then what's been really helpful is to actually go into these interviews and ask like, okay, why, like, why is this important to you? And sometimes people even change their opinions because the moment you start asking them, why they actually need it, yeah, they might prioritize things differently, or they just give you much more nuance on, yeah, what they actually do with this information. Yeah. No. Wonderful. Sid, you're next.
Thanks. My question is, do we incorporate the popularity of features when designing our menus? And I wonder what our philosophy is. I could see kind of two ways of doing it. Like, yeah, if something is like not popular, we kind of deprioritize it to remove the clutter for the majority of our users. On the other hand, we want to prevent like a catch-22 where something never becomes popular because nobody could find it. I'll give maybe two examples. So if you look at our journey, right now, our focus is on making release better. Knowing that things like monitor and configure have very low usage, both below 10%. I think the data for package may be a bit off. I think it has higher usage. At least that's what our bills are telling us. And then if you look, and I've tried to find this, the page wasn't loading, but if you look at, for example, requirements interactions. So I assume this graph is about requirements management. And these are total interactions, like 250 a month, with like we have more than 1 million paid users and many more unpaid users. But if I look at GitLab, my menu is requirements that's only used by like 300 people out of the many millions. It gets like a top level menu item. And I've asked once, and the reasoning was, well, the people who use requirements management really thinks it should be there. And I don't disagree with that, but I think there's a bit of Bayesian logic there. Yeah, the people who use it, but there's very few who do use it. And maybe this only shows up if you have Ultimate. But I think like maybe requirements, as long as it's not super popular, it should be nested somewhere. And you could make the same case for other items like configures 2%. Should it have a top level item like infrastructure, or should these items be under deployments? So I wonder, and then like, this is what people use GitLab for, and relatively it has less than half of the real estate. So I want that's the context of the question. Do we incorporate popularity?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wonder if I'm the right person to answer this, because as a researcher, I always hold back from like answering design related question. But my 2 cents on this is ultimately, yes, you do want to structure your navigation or your menu in a way that it caters for the main journeys, right? And that, because that would reduce clutter, and that just, helps users to get quickly to where they want. And then the question is just, how do you cater for like discoverability of like new features or things that you want to promote, or like these edge cases. And I think there are a couple of ways, either like understanding the journey very well, where this feature comes in, and how can it basically be integrated into the journey. Or the other thing is, have basically specific views, right? And like, who are the users that are using this particular feature, and how is it being used in comparison to the other like more popular use cases for GitLab. I don't have enough knowledge around that to say like, this is the way to go, but I think these are some things to explore. Yeah.
Yeah, Anna, that's totally fair, because this is not your area, so I wouldn't expect you to have in-depth knowledge.
Sorry about that. This is UX thing, but not a UX research thing. Although
that's totally fine that you asked those, Sid, because this is certainly part of UX research. So Catherine Akapara, who's no longer with the company, did in-depth research on our navigation, and a lot of the changes we made were based directly on that research, and we are making changes now still. So Michael Lee is the designer. He's in Australia, so he's not able to be here right now due to time zone differences. And then Marcel van Remmerden are both deeply involved. But before we say the right people aren't on the call, let me just really quickly ask, because Pedro and then Jeremy Elder are closer to this than probably anyone else on the call. Do y'all have any more insight here to what we learned from the research and why we've made some of the decisions that we have?
So I don't have any insight at the moment. However, I'm asking the same questions. So I know that as part of the plan to have UX foundations more involved in navigation, that's something that's highly on my radar. And working in navigation before, these are definitely the type of questions that I'm going to be pursuing to get good, solid answers for. How we weigh use case versus feature promotion, and how even workflows and all the hierarchies established. So definitely on my radar. I don't know if Pedro can provide any more knowledge on current state.
Yeah, my knowledge, as far as I know, with the research that was done, did not include popularity. So yeah, my short answer is Sid, great point. We were looking mostly at other, perhaps bigger problems of not discoverability, but navigation in general. And yeah, popularity is certainly a good thing for us to look into, to remove clutter and to guide people to the features that we want them to look at, because it creates more value for them sooner. So great point.
Yeah, and what Jeremy was starting to get at is that we're building out the UX Foundations team, both from a research and design perspective, but also bringing more engineering developer talent onto the team. And as we do that, navigation is going to shift over to that team. And so we'll be able to put even more, we put a lot of attention on it already, but we'll continue to put even more attention on it. And one of the nice things about that change too is Jeremy has been so deeply involved in navigation from a pure design standpoint. This puts like all of that on the same team. So it's not just organization, it's not just strategy, it's organization and strategy and presentation kind of all in one place. And I think that'll be a good change.
Cool. Thanks for that. That all makes total sense. Couple of months ago, or maybe over half a year ago, when I first started talking about, hey, why is requirements management in the top level menu? And to prevent misunderstandings, I pushed really hard to get requirements management in GitLab. I think it's an amazing feature. I think it's great that people can move from the legacy products and have this in GitLab. So I'm a big fan of the feature. I don't think it deserves the top level menu. And when I pushed on it, it was like, well, research shows that the people who use it really want it in the top level menu and thinks it belongs there. So maybe it's good to maybe document in the handbook or something else that, look, we gotta optimize our menu structure for the average user. And some parts of GitLab, well, they're an equal part of GitLab, but they're just not used by the average user. And we have to make decisions. It is like, if we put everything in there, it's going to be overwhelming, and we're going to incorporate popularity and how relevant it is to an average user. And then the way, and so that is, make that a formal criteria. That would be my suggestion. I'm not sure you should do it, but consider that, so that next time we have such a conversation, that it's not just about what the people, the person using the feature or the people making that functionality will always want a higher placement.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. We are finally at a place with Pajamas where we're moving past just documenting visual design and interactions and moving into documenting more around the strategy of what we would call a region. Navigation is a region, and we absolutely are going to put that rationale in there. We're just starting to do that for navigation. As part of this conversation, I'll make a note. I think we'll have Tori probably take a look at that. Jeremy, you can help convey this conversation. But Sid, what you're getting at is a really good point, which is each of our individual PMs are going to be incentivized to build usage of their particular group. And the incentive is always going to be to get that as high as they possibly can. And then there's that tension between, okay, but then does it make sense for everybody? And we do have to do a good and better job of managing that.
Cool. Yeah, that well said.
All right, wonderful. Thank you for this discussion. Are there any other questions? I don't see anything in the agenda, but maybe someone else has anything.
Hey,
Yeah, I have a question.
ahead.
I'm a new team member. I just started 2 weeks ago. I'm Mirko from Germany, solutions architect. One thing that struck me, the merge request is really a very, I feel like a little bit overloaded object in GitLab. And I can imagine that once we have like more testing stuff, this merge request is getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. It has become a really huge container. And also all the changes and comments you can have in there. This is, for me as a starter, as a beginner, this looks like the most cluttered object right now. So are there any things going on to change the view of that or the clutter we've talked about?
Oh, this is, Anna, don't even feel like you have to go into this one. Pedro, you are our expert here. Please chime in.
Yeah, great question. And it's very interesting that in the few weeks, I think that's what you said, Mirko, that you've joined GitLab, that is your impression. What does that say to the impression of our users, right, across the globe? So yes, it's something that we're deeply aware and care about. Right now, in the recent past, we have been focusing our efforts in performance, because that's something that we know that we can change more directly without necessarily making a great rehaul of the whole UI. So that's something that we're focusing right now, is pure product performance, improving response times so that the UI itself doesn't feel so slow, but also understanding the perception of performance that users have, not only regarding the product, but also regarding their own performance, how they are moving across the UI. And that is another input that we have that tells us that users with the current structure of the merge request page, they are not as efficient as they could be. So sometimes they could even feel like, hey, the product feels slow, but it's the product making the users slow. All of this to say that, yes, we've been focusing on that. And one of the things that I'm trying to prioritize right now in the short term is to do a foundational research on navigation in merge requests, because we have many different groups trying to contribute things to the UI and to the experience. And we're not solving those correctly. Like a very small example is how you navigate between comments. Some comments, I don't know if you're aware of this, but some comments can live only in the overview tab, so they're not attached to code, and other comments are attached to code or to lines of changes in files. And right now you have to jump back and forth sometimes between tabs to find the comments that you're looking for. And we have a control at the top that allows you to jump across them, and it's nice and all of that. But in the end, it's a disjointed experience, because you have to do a lot of cognitive work to figure out where you are, where you need to go, and where things are. And so, yes, it's a problem that we're aware of, and I'm prioritizing that as soon as possible. And I'm pushing my PM for us to work on that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro.
Did you want Pedro to talk quickly about the report section?
Yeah, I think that's a good one. It's really important. I was almost missing that. So Jeremy, if you want to talk about that, be my guest.
Yeah. So just really quickly, one effort that's currently in flight is that the merge request reports region. That's the area where all of the different status of security, all of the reports are running, you're getting the feedback today, they're very inconsistent in the presentation. And we're working on a visual update and a semantic update to make that more consistent between what we consider each widget. So each report is akin to a widget. And so that means streamlining the controls. So the expand collapse, the view report, all of the navigation, the iconography for the status of those reports. All of that right now is being updated, and designers are working on that to get it ready for implementation shortly. So that will help at least with that reports region to get that more synchronized and more systematized. And we will be bringing that into Pajamas as well. And out of that, once it is a system, we'll be able to test things and make more global changes to those areas where if we do more testing in the future and we realize that we need to update iconography, et cetera, it's going to be able to be updated as a system and as a whole. So we'll be able to make changes more efficiently and better. But that effort there will have more visual impact and hopefully also feel more performant just by the nature of the design changes. So.
Thank you, Jeremy. Christy, you have another question.
Yeah, a few months ago, Eric Johnson suggested, as we were talking about our system usability scale results, he's like, I love that he thought this way. He's like, okay, we know a lot of what, we don't know a lot of why, and suggested us really digging in and speaking with respondents to better understand why we were getting the scores that we were getting. Anna, I know you didn't run this study. I know that Adam did, but he's out of office. But I think you're close enough to it that you could talk a little bit about what we learned from that, because it's really impactful.
Yeah, definitely. So for a bit of background, like when you want to understand more deeply why something is happening within like the SAS score, you kind of need to split it up across different topics. And that's kind of what Adam has been doing. So really focusing that this particular part of the research of understanding if users perceive a different, perceived usability of GitLab differently 1 year ago, and like comparing it to how they perceive it right now. So this was kind of the focus of the research. And what came out, the difference was actually not really significant. So there was a small positive change, but not really that strong. And for those that said like, well, GitLab feels the same in terms of usability, the reason why they felt this way was really because then they didn't get used to it. So it has nothing to do with, I remember Adam had all these hypotheses of what could it be, but it was actually the fact that, they just couldn't get used to it. Whereas those that felt, yes, GitLab improved in terms of usability, they found a way to get used to it, and they felt like, yeah, I know what I need to do. And I think that's quite interesting because, how do you get used to something, right? Like what's the mechanism behind this? And learnability is one of these, bigger topics that comes to mind there. Again, there are even more factors that kind of contribute to, what is learnability actually like? Is it the onboarding? Has it to do with navigation? Has it to do with discoverability? Is it also like supporting others in their learning process? So, and I think, I know that there will be more research next quarter, and Nick and Adam will be looking into this. So yeah, it's definitely not the end yet.
Yeah, it was interesting to me because I read all of the verbatim comments that come in on every SUS. I read every single one because I think they're fascinating and it's so useful to me. And so I had seen enough comments pointing to a learnability problem that I wasn't completely shocked when Adam came back and said, yeah, it seems like this really is our problem, is learnability. Our Q3 OKRs as a UX department are focused almost exclusively on learnability. So yes, more research to really dig in and figure out, okay, what does this mean? What things are impacting it? But then also design will be focused on looking at our product as it stands today and doing heuristic reviews. We've got industry knowledge, we can look at other products and how they do things, and we're going to do comparisons and just say, hey, using our knowledge, where can we look at it and go, yeah, we've got learnability problems here. And then we're talking to product about Q4 shared OKRs around actually making changes to learnability. We just didn't feel like we knew enough about the details in Q3 to spin people off into projects when so much is already going on. We want to come to PM with, hey, we know what's going on, and here are our clear recommendations for how we start to fix it.
Yeah, definitely. Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for the discussion. I don't see any other questions and we're also at time. So with that, thank you again for joining and have a wonderful rest of your day.